A raggedy cowboy shows up at her door, asking for shelter. Then she realizes he's the missing millionaire who owned half the county. "I don't want to bother you, ma'am. I just need a place to keep dry. A porch would do." June gripped the broom tighter, her eyes narrowing beneath the brim of her rain-damp hat. She stood framed in the golden light of the farmhouse doorway, the storm behind the man roaring like a wild thing in the dark. "We don't open our door for strangers this far out," she said evenly, not lowering the broom. The man took a slow breath, water dripping from the brim of his battered hat. His coat was torn at the sleeve, jeans caked in mud, boots soaked through. He looked like he had ridden 100 miles through 100 storms and still hadn't found peace. "I understand," he said, his voice rough, low. "I'll keep moving." He turned slightly as if to leave, the wind pushing against him like it wanted to finish the job the rain had started. Then a second voice came, softer, steady. "You can sleep in the barn. But no trouble, son." June turned to see her mother, Edith, standing behind her in a worn shawl, eyes clear despite the haze of age. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had lived through too much to be startled by a stranger in the night. The man, Cole, though they did not know that yet, nodded once. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. June hesitated, then stepped aside. She handed him an old wool blanket from the hall and pointed toward the side path that led around the house. "Back through the gate. There's hay in the corner stall. Don't touch the horses." "I won't," he said, and with that, he disappeared into the storm. The door shut behind him with a solid click, muting the wind. June let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "What are you thinking, Mama?" she asked, voice tight. Edith turned, slowly walking back toward the kitchen. "I'm thinking no one looks at a woman like that in the rain, unless he's got nowhere else in the world to go." The barn light flickered once as June glanced out the window. Through the misted glass she could see him, just a shape in the dark, moving slow, careful, tired. He reached the barn doors, opened one side, and disappeared inside. Rain hit the roof like gravel, and thunder shook the panes, but June's eyes stayed fixed on the dark where he had gone. There was no fear in his face, she realized, no wild desperation. Just an exhaustion that ran to the bone and a loneliness that seemed older than the hills. Later that night, long after the storm settled into a dull whisper, and Edith had gone to bed, June passed by the back porch and paused. Out there in the barn, a stranger lay on hay beneath a leaky roof. She told herself she should check the lock. She told herself she should sleep. Instead, she stood for a long time at the window, the blanket of quiet pressing close, the sound of rain tapping gently on glass, and wondered what kind of life leaves a man with nothing but mud on his boots and gratitude in his eyes. Before the wind carried him to their porch, June Parker lived in quiet routine. She had not always meant to stay on the family farm. There was a time, just a few years ago, when she had taught English at a middle school 3 counties over. Her classroom had been filled with paperback novels, stacks of poetry books, and posters of literary quotes that faded in the afternoon sun. Her dream, spoken aloud only once to a friend in college, was to one day open a little bookstore with a garden out back where people could buy dahlias with Dickinson and tulips with Tolkien. But then her mother had the stroke. It was not entirely unexpected. Edith had always been sturdy in spirit but not in body, and the years had worn her down. When June received the call, she packed her things the same day. The bookstore dream went into a cardboard box along with the classroom decorations, and she never opened it again. Now, the days were slow but full. June rose with the sun, fed the chickens, swept the porch, brewed her mother's tea, and filled in the blanks when Edith's memory slipped. Some days were better than others. On good days, Edith remembered how to make her sweet biscuits. On bad ones, she asked where her husband was, dead 10 years now, and June would just smile softly, brush her mother's hand, and change the subject. She never complained, but the silence grew louder each season. Her journal was the only place she let the truth spill. In ink, late at night, she wrote about the ache of things left undone, the comfort and weight of duty, and the peculiar kind of loneliness that comes not from being unloved, but from being always needed and never chosen. Then Cole came. He kept to the barn just as promised. The next morning, June found the pitchfork rehung properly on the wall and the hay neatly raked. He had even mended the loose latch on the tack room door. When she asked what he was doing, he shrugged and said, "Paying rent." Each day he found something else to fix. The porch step that had creaked for months went silent overnight. The gutter above the shed stopped leaking. He cleaned out the chicken coop without being asked, and every evening he returned to the barn, never once coming to the house unless invited. He never asked for food, though June began leaving extra cornbread and coffee on a tray just inside the mudroom. By the second week, he started leaving the tray washed and dried. Edith watched him carefully. She never said much, but her eyes followed him when he walked across the yard or knelt to fix a fence post. One evening, after Cole helped her sit in the rocking chair with more patience than most family ever did, she whispered to June as they stood in the kitchen, "He's not just passing through." June raised an eyebrow. "No?" Edith shook her head slowly, her voice low and certain. "That man's been running from something." June didn't ask what she meant. She didn't have to. There was a stillness to Cole, a kind of steady sorrow he carried like a weight in his shoulders. He rarely smiled, but when he did, usually at something Edith said, it was a slow, genuine thing, like he hadn't used the muscles in years. At night, June sometimes found herself listening for sounds from the barn. Once, she heard the soft strum of a guitar. Another time, a quiet murmur of what might have been a prayer, or perhaps a name. She didn't ask questions, she didn't pry. But in the space where her old dreams used to live, something small stirred. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was the sense that perhaps, just maybe, two people with enough broken pieces between them could build something quiet, something lasting, not out of fire and passion, but out of peace and the patience to stay. The days slipped into a rhythm neither of them spoke aloud. Cole worked quietly around the edges of the farm, fixing what needed fixing without waiting to be asked. He moved like someone used to working with his hands, measured, methodical, present. June noticed the details. The old screen door that had slammed against the frame every time the wind blew was suddenly soft with new hinges. The kitchen drain, which gurgled when it rained, now flowed smoothly. Even the forgotten lavender bush near the porch, brown and brittle from seasons of neglect, had been cleared and replanted, its roots cradled in fresh soil, mulched with straw. She never said thank you out loud, but one morning she left a loaf of warm bread on the barn's window ledge, with a small container of apple butter and a folded napkin. The bread disappeared. The next day the napkin came back, washed and ironed. He never mentioned it, neither did she. But something delicate passed between them in those exchanges, quieter than words, truer than routine. One afternoon, June took the old trail through the backwoods to collect berries. The sun was high and the air thick with midsummer heat. She moved slowly, humming as she picked. But somewhere between the edge of the creek and the split oak, her vision blurred. Her knees gave out. The world spun once, then went dark. She woke with the scent of leather and cedar. A coat was draped over her chest, warm and slightly damp. The air around her felt different, calm, watchful. She tried to sit up but found herself propped gently against a tree trunk, her pulse still weak but returning. On her lap, tucked beneath her open palm, was a small piece of folded paper. She opened it with trembling fingers. "You're stronger than you know, but even strong things break. Let someone hold you sometimes." June stared at the words for a long moment. They weren't just comforting, they were intimate, like someone had seen directly into the tenderest part of her and spoken only to it. Her throat tightened. She looked around, but Cole was gone. No footprints, no sound. Just the echo of what he'd left behind. By the time she made it back to the house, the sun was lower. Edith sat on the porch with her knitting and said, without looking up, "He carried you back. Didn't want you to wake up scared." June nodded. blinking fast. She went inside and sat at the kitchen table, the paper still in her hand. She had been alone for so long that she'd learned how to carry herself, how to fold her pain into neat corners. But now, here was someone who hadn't asked for her story, someone who simply saw it anyway, and without trying to fix her, he had simply held space. Her fingers traced the line of the handwriting again. She didn't cry right away, but when the tears did come, they came softly, like rain that had waited patiently behind the clouds. Because for the first time in years, June Parker didn't feel invisible. It started with little things. June had noticed Cole's strange habits from early on, but she had chalked them up to the quirks of someone who had lived on the road too long. He never looked straight into security cameras when they stopped in town. He avoided walking into shops with televisions playing in the background. When a neighbor tried to snap a picture of the barn's repairs for a local newsletter, Cole had quietly excused himself and didn't return until after sundown. He never carried a phone, said he didn't trust them, and while he didn't read the paper, June once saw him glance over her shoulder and correct the date of an obscure Civil War battle she'd read aloud from an old book. His knowledge wasn't casual. It was deep, thoughtful, educated. He quoted Shakespeare while fixing fence posts, and once explained the difference between heirloom and hybrid seeds like he'd taught the subject. And then there was the guitar. It was old, its strings slightly rusted, the body scratched from time. June had kept it in the attic, a leftover from her father's youth. She had forgotten it was even there until one afternoon, returning early from town, she heard the sound of music drifting from the barn. She followed it, slow and careful, heart pounding for reasons she didn't fully understand. There, in the open shadows of the stall, Cole sat on a hay bale, head bent, eyes closed, his fingers moving across the strings with impossible ease. The melody was haunting, somewhere between folk and classical, carried with such precision and emotion it felt like a prayer. He didn't see her watching. She stayed only a moment, long enough to feel her chest ache, and then backed away silently. That night, while washing dishes, she asked without turning around, "Who are you, really?" There was a long pause. He was at the table, drawing silverware, but the movement stopped. When she turned to look at him, he was staring down at the towel in his hands, his face unreadable. "Just a man who had everything," he said quietly, and watched it burn. He didn't offer more, and she didn't press, but the answer lodged in her like a thorn. Later, when he'd gone out to check the barn for leaks before a forecasted storm, June sat at her laptop and typed the words that had been whispering at her for weeks. "Man missing, Wyoming, millionaire, fire." It didn't take long. His face was on the third article. Cole Thatcher, real estate developer, ranching investor, classical guitarist in his college days, widowed in a house fire that claimed the lives of his wife and daughter. Afterward, he'd sold everything and disappeared. No foul play suspected, but rumors ran wild. Some said he'd gone to Mexico. Others claimed he'd taken his own life. June sat back in her chair, stunned. The photo in the article showed him clean-shaven, younger, in a tailored jacket, holding a little girl in his arms. She couldn't breathe. When she stepped out onto the porch, the sky was already rumbling. Rain threatened but hadn't fallen yet. Cole stood by the barn, looking out across the field. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "You were right," she said softly. "You had everything." He looked at her for a long time, then he nodded once, as if a heavy door inside him had just opened. "She was 7, he said. "My daughter. My wife was making dinner. I was working in another room. I thought I'd smell smoke. I didn't. By the time I reached them, it was too late." June said nothing. "I tried to make it right. Sold the land, the company, every building I'd put my name on. But none of it mattered. Not to them." He looked down, his voice low and ragged. "I'd built empires, June. But I didn't protect my family. I don't want to build anything again, unless it has your name on it." The words hit her like a wave. She stood still, heart aching, watching him stand in the shadow of the barn like a man carved from grief and hope all at once. She stepped forward. "You didn't have to tell me." "I did," he said, "because I want to stay, and I can't stay unless you see all of me, even the ruined parts." Thunder cracked in the distance, but she didn't flinch. She reached for his hand, her fingers curling into his. "I saw you the night you showed up at our door," she whispered, "and I haven't looked away since." Under the golden hush of early autumn, something began to shift. It was not dramatic, no grand declarations, no long speeches or sudden embraces. It was slower than that, more subtle, like the way wind begins to smell like wood smoke, or the way you notice you're smiling more often without realizing when it started. June and Cole settled into a rhythm that felt unspoken but certain. He mended what was broken, inside and out. He helped her replant the garden she had abandoned long ago. Lavender, coneflowers, daisies, all poking through soft-turned soil. He built her a new fence around the patch, not because she asked, but because he noticed the old one leaning like a tired man. And she, in turn, began cooking dinner for 3 without thinking. She laid an extra plate. He always cleaned up after without a word. Cole started walking with Edith every morning, gently coaxing her down the gravel path that led past the chicken coop. He never rushed her. When she stumbled, he steadied her with quiet hands. When she forgot the names of birds, he would name them again, slowly, every time. And sometimes, when she was tired and cranky and scared of her own mind, he would hum soft music from the back porch until she fell asleep in the rocker. June watched it all unfold, her heart both tender and cautious. In the afternoons, she began sitting out on the porch to write again. Just fragments at first, sentences that trailed off, ideas she couldn't finish. Then one day, she opened an old leather journal, and the words came like rain. The story was about a man with a broken name and a coat full of silence, who knocked on a door in the middle of a storm. The woman inside gave him shelter, but what he gave her in return was something else, something like peace, something like permission to live again. She didn't tell Cole about the story, not yet. But one evening, just before sunset, he approached her while she was picking lavender near the edge of the garden. "Got a second?" he asked, voice low. She looked up, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Of course." He led her down a path she hadn't walked in years, toward the back of the property where an old wooden shed sat half forgotten, leaning against a copse of oak trees. "I know this place," she murmured. "You should," he said. "Your mother told me it used to be your playhouse, then a place you wrote stories in when you were a teenager." She smiled faintly. "It's just an old shack." He pulled open the door. Inside, it wasn't a shack anymore. The walls were freshly painted, a pale, soft lavender, the exact shade of the flowers she loved. A simple wooden desk stood by the window, overlooking the field. A new chair, handmade and smooth. Shelves lined with notebooks, blank and waiting. A jar of pens, a thermos for tea, even a candle that smelled like honey and cedar. She stepped inside slowly, eyes wide. "I wanted to fix it for you," Cole said behind her. "Thought maybe you'd want a place that's just yours. No expectations, no weight, just words." She turned to face him, her throat tight. "You did this? For me?" "I want this to be your writing room," he said, voice soft. "And I want to be the story you write without fear." Her breath caught. The air between them shifted. June stepped closer, not touching him yet, but standing close enough to feel the warmth of his presence. "I haven't written anything real in years," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But you've been writing something every day, even if you didn't know it, in the way you speak to your mama, in the way you leave bread in the barn, in the way you let me stay." She reached out, took his hand. There were calluses on his fingers, soil beneath his nails. But the way he held her hand was careful, reverent, like she was something fragile and powerful at once. "I don't know where this goes," she said honestly. "Neither do I," he replied. "But I know I want to go there with you." And in the fading light of that early autumn evening, June Parker felt the door inside her heart creak open, not all the way, but far enough to let someone in. The morning was bright, crisp, with the first hints of autumn wind, when Cole drove Edith into town to visit the community center. The old building had a leaky roof, and Cole had promised the volunteers he would patch it up before the next storm rolled through. June had packed them sandwiches and a thermos of tea, and Edith, wearing her favorite wool shawl, had insisted on going along to supervise. The work was easy for him, quiet, repetitive, and grounding. Hammer in hand, he moved across the tin panels like he'd been born doing it. When he finished, he helped Edith down the stairs and into a rocking chair on the porch, where she could chat with the other women embroidering quilts. Inside, as he washed his hands, he didn't notice the man watching him from the end of the hall. Hank Liddell was the county land officer and head of the Ranchers Cooperative, a man with sharp eyes and a long memory. He stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing on the wood floor. "You're handy with a hammer," Hank said casually. Cole glanced up. "Been doing it a while." Hank tilted his head. "You look awful familiar." Cole didn't answer. Hank studied him for a long moment, then lowered his voice. "You're Cole Thatcher, aren't you?" Cole didn't flinch. He simply looked the older man in the eye and gave a single nod. "I won't say a word if you don't want me to," Hank said. "Lord knows this town's no place for gossip. But you do know you still legally own near half the hayfields west of Miller Creek, don't you?" Cole wiped his hands on a rag. "I know." "You planning on doing anything about it?" Cole's eyes drifted to the window, where Edith laughed gently with a neighbor over a shared story. Beyond that, he could just make out the curve of June's garden path in his mind's eye, even from miles away. "I'm not interested in the land," Cole said finally. "I'm interested in the backyard, where Miss Edith hangs her laundry, and the lavender patch by the fence, where June hums to herself when she thinks no one's listening." Hank gave a quiet chuckle, then leaned a hip against the table. "Well, that's mighty poetic," he said, "but there's trouble brewing. The co-op's got folks arguing over grazing lines and boundary claims. No one's strong enough to mediate except the man whose name's still on the deeds." He paused. "People need you, Cole, even if you don't want to be needed." Cole took a breath, slow and deliberate. "I'll think about it," he said. That night, June didn't say a word about the conversation Hank had clearly relayed to her. She moved around the kitchen as usual, stirring soup, slicing bread, tucking a blanket over her mother's legs. But something in her was distant, quiet. After dinner, when the dishes were done and Edith had gone to bed, she finally spoke. "If you go," she said, not looking at him, "I'll understand. But I won't chase a man who doesn't know where his home is." Cole stood there for a long time, watching her hands as they dried the last plate. The next morning, as the sun rose over the fields, he saddled June's old pickup and drove into town. By noon, he sat in the county clerk's office, signing papers under Hank's careful eye. When it was done, Cole stood, paused, and then added one last note. He opened the ledger, requested the transfer of 5 parcels, some of the richest pastureland in the county, to families who had been pushed out over the years. Names Hank recognized, small ranchers who had held on by their fingernails. "You sure about this?" Hank asked, brows raised. "I am. What should I tell them when they ask why?" Cole tucked the signed document back into the folder and gave Hank a small, tired smile. "Tell them the woman who gave me shelter deserves to live in a town that remembers kindness," and with that he walked out, the wind catching the edge of his coat, the sun warming his back, as if the land itself had been holding its breath and now finally let it go. It was early June, and the lavender fields had opened like soft flames across the hills, painting the earth in shades of violet and silver buhl. The breeze that drifted over the grass carried their scent, a quiet mix of sun-warmed earth and sweetness that clung to the skin, the hair, the memory. It was the kind of scent that stayed with you, long after you'd left the field behind. The town had changed since Cole signed those papers, but not in loud or obvious ways. There were no grand speeches, no newspaper headlines or ribbon cuttings. No one stopped him in the street to shake his hand, and yet something had shifted. Men nodded at him when he passed. Farmers who had once eyed him cautiously now lifted 2 fingers off the brims of their hats. Women left jars of preserves on the back porch of the community center, after he fixed a window there. Children waved to him from wooden fences as he rode by on the old quarter horse that June's family had nursed back to health. The town knew. They didn't need the details. They remembered the name, and they saw what he had done, and more importantly, what he had chosen not to take credit for. But none of that mattered to Cole the way June did. That afternoon, with the sun just beginning to lean westward and the breeze warm enough to keep the bugs at bay, Cole asked if she wanted to walk. "No reason," he said with a soft smile. "Just thought the fields were looking especially pretty." June glanced out the window, saw the lavender bobbing gently in the wind like waves in a purple sea, and nodded. She laced her boots, slipped on her straw hat, and followed him out the back door without a word. The air was filled with the hum of bees and the faint rustle of drying grass. They walked side by side, neither rushing nor lagging, their strides falling naturally in sync. No one needed to lead. They passed the chicken coop, the windmill, and then the old wooden fence that bordered the far edge of the property. Cole opened the gate for her. She stepped through, her breath catching in her throat. The lavender meadow stretched before them like something out of a dream, endless, wild, and whispering. The plants swayed in unison with the wind, the light making the whole field shimmer like it was alive. "I haven't been out here in years," June said softly. "I know," Cole replied, his voice gentle but edged with something deeper. "You told me once this was your favorite place as a girl." She smiled, her eyes scanning the familiar but distant terrain. "It was. I used to lie down right in the middle of it and close my eyes. I'd pretend the wind through the lavender was telling me stories. Like the plants had secrets they only shared with children who listened hard enough." Cole didn't laugh. He took her hand, warm and steady, and she let him. They walked farther in, the world narrowing until it was just the two of them and the scent of lavender, the hum of bees nearby and the sunlight pouring through the spaces between. Then she saw it. In the center of the field stood a small wooden table, low and square, its legs carved with vines. It hadn't been there yesterday. Resting on top was a small box, crafted from reclaimed cedar, polished but simple. Its grain caught the light. June's steps slowed. "Cole," she murmured. He didn't answer at first, just turned to her, eyes meeting hers without flinching, his face more open than she had ever seen it. "I've been riding all over trying to forget my name," he said, his voice barely above the breeze. "But when I heard you say it softly, like it wasn't something to be ashamed of, I wanted to wear it proud again." He reached down, opened the box, and inside was a ring. No diamonds, no polish, just a plain silver band, worn smooth and hand-etched, with two initials, hers and his, tucked side by side like they belonged there all along. Then, slowly, he knelt, not in grand ceremony, but in surrender. "I don't have a mansion to offer," he said. "Just a home with creaky floors, mornings that smell like coffee and rain, and a porch where you'll always have a chair. Will you be my home, June?" Her eyes welled up in an instant, and for once she didn't blink them away. She stepped forward, bent down until she was level with him, and took both his hands in hers. She didn't say anything beautiful. She didn't need to. "This has always been home," she whispered, voice trembling with emotion. "You just needed to knock twice." He smiled then, fully, freely. The kind of smile that let light in all the corners of his soul. He slipped the ring onto her finger as the wind swept around them, moving the lavender in wide, graceful waves, as if the whole field exhaled a blessing. They stood there in silence, wrapped in each other and the soft light of a sky turning gold. Two people not made of perfection, but of choice, of redemption, of staying again and again when it would have been easier to run. And somewhere above them the sun lingered just a little longer, as if even the day itself had waited for this to begin. 1 year later, the land looked different. Not just the grass, greener now, richer from hands that tended it with purpose. Not just the barn, freshly painted and filled with the quiet hum of small machines and morning radio. Not even the lavender fields, though they bloomed fuller than ever, spreading like hope across the hill. No, the land looked different because it had been lived in, loved back to life. Cole and June had made good on their quiet promise. Together, they launched the Shelter Project, a cooperative effort that offered struggling families and veterans small plots to farm, learn sustainable skills, and find, if not fortune, at least a place to stand. The old equipment shed became a learning center. The barn was divided into clean, dry sleeping quarters, and every soul who came was greeted with respect, no questions asked. June handled the books, the curriculum, the mentorship circles. Cole built fences, ran irrigation lines, and taught classes on everything from soil regeneration to how to saddle a horse without spooking it. Edith, fully recovered beyond what doctors had expected, became the heartbeat of the place. She spent mornings teaching children to knead biscuit dough and afternoons telling stories on the porch swing while peeling apples. The farm was no longer quiet, but it was peaceful. And in the middle of it all, June found herself writing again. Not just fragments or journal entries, but something real. Her first full manuscript took shape between late-night tea and early morning inspiration. A story about a man who showed up wet, ragged, and uninvited, and how the door that opened for him changed more than just his future. When her book was finally released, The Man Who Didn't Want a Roof But Found a Home, the whole town came out for the reading. It was held in the old wooden church on the hill, the pews filled with neighbors, farmers, single mothers, veterans, and children who had once walked up the Parker driveway scared and now ran through it laughing. Cole sat in the front row, guitar in his lap, fingers brushing strings like he was keeping time with her heartbeat. June stood at the pulpit, the first copy of her book in her hands, her voice steady even as emotions swelled. She read the final passage. I opened the door that night, thinking I'd offer shelter. I didn't know he was the one who would rebuild the roof over my soul. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then came the softest applause, palms touching palms with reverence, the kind of sound that doesn't break a silence but blesses it. Afterward, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in violet and honey, Cole met her at the steps of the church. He took her hand, not like a promise but like a continuation. No storm ever scared me again, he whispered, his voice brushing her ear. Not since you let me in. She smiled, tears warm but calm in her eyes. They walked together down the path to their truck, the scent of lavender drifting behind them, and ahead of them only more land, more light, and the long, steady work of love. And so, under the quiet skies of the American West, a raggedy cowboy and a gentle woman turned an old barn into a refuge, a forgotten field into a sanctuary, and a silent ache into something that could finally breathe. Their story wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was built from glances, quiet gestures, lavender blooms, and the simple courage to open a door, twice. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the power of kindness, or gave you hope for love that heals, we invite you to be part of more moments just like this. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where every tale is crafted to comfort your spirit, stir your soul, and remind you that sometimes the gentlest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep your heart open, your porch light on, and your soul stirred.